The spring June Calder turned 13. She started digging ditches that didn't go anywhere. Not drainage ditches. Any farmer in Monona County could dig one of those. A clean, straight cut that picks up water and carries it off your field down to the road. Gone. June's ditches ran the wrong way. They ran across the hill instead of down it. Long, shallow trenches that followed the curve of the slope like the lines on a map. And they didn't empty into anything at all. A ditch with no outlet, a ditch to nowhere. Every evening after school, she was out on the west hillside behind her family's barn with a spade, a ball of twine, and a strange wooden triangle. 3 fence boards nailed together with a string hanging from the top and a rusted steel nut swinging on the end of it. She'd walk that triangle across the slope a step at a time, watching the string, dropping a chalk mark at her feet. Then she'd dig along her marks, slowly, by hand. Trucks slowed down on the blacktop to watch. Neighbors traded it over coffee in Moorhead, the way neighbors do. Dale Calder's girl is cutting ditches that don't drain. Somebody ought to tell her water runs downhill. It wasn't mean laughter, it was the soft, puzzled kind. The kind people use when a thing makes no sense, and they've decided it doesn't have to. Her own brother told her she was scratching up the hill like a chicken. By the second week of June, she had cut 5 of those ditches, more than 600 feet of them, stacked one above another across the hillside. She hadn't explained herself to a single soul. But on the last Friday of that month, the sky over the Loess Hills opened and dropped 4.5 inches of rain in one evening. And by Saturday noon, every farmer on that blacktop would come stand at the edge of her hillside, and not one of them would be laughing. If stories of quiet stubbornness, family, and old wisdom pulled out of attics and cedar chests are your kind of stories, subscribe and ride along with us every week. And leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this one travels. The Loess Hills of western Iowa were built by wind. When the Ice Age glaciers ground rock into flour and the meltwater dried, the wind picked that silt up and stacked it in ridges 200 feet deep along the Missouri River Valley. Farmers there call it sugar dirt. It's some of the richest ground in America, and it is also the most fragile. Lice will hold a cut bank straight up and down like a slice of cake. But let water gather and get moving on it, and it melts like that same cake left out in the rain. The Calders had farmed 320 acres of it, 4 generations worth, in the valley of the Soldier River. Dale Calder ran corn and soybeans. He was a patient, deliberate man who checked the sky the way other men check their phones. June's mother, Ann, kept 200 laying hens and sold brown eggs off the porch. Her brother, Mark, was 17, drove a rust-colored pickup, and figured most things June did were a waste of good daylight. And in the room off the kitchen lived Grandma Ruth, 81 years old, sharp as a tack, with a cedar chest under her window that she'd hauled through 6 decades and 2 farmhouses. Inside it were her father's things. Harlan Voss had been 19 years old in 1935, a farm boy with no farm work, when the government put a shovel in his hands and sent him to a civilian Conservation Corps camp in the hills outside Pisgah. Ruth kept his photo album, she kept his discharge papers, and she kept a short stack of thin gray government bulletins that nobody had opened in 50 years. It was Ruth who noticed that June didn't watch the crops the way farm kids usually do. She watched the water, where it ran when it rained, where it cut, what it took with it, and where it put what it took. The spring June turned 13 was the 3rd violent spring in a row. The storms came harder than the old-timers remembered. Faster, meaner, an inch of rain in 20 minutes instead of an afternoon. And the West 40 was coming apart. What had been finger-width rills in the corn rows 2 years ago was now a gully behind the barn deep enough for June to stand into her chest. After every storm, the road ditch along the blacktop filled with a fan of black silt. The Calder's best topsoil piled up like drifted snow, and the county grader pushed it off the road like snow too. Karen Boyd, the district conservationist, came out in March and walked the hill with Dale. She was honest about it, which they appreciated. Leave the stalk standing, she said. Get a cover crop on it. Keep the ground covered. All good advice, and everyone standing on that hillside knew it wasn't enough. A hill like that needs structures, she said. Terraces, basins, something to break the run. But the cost share list was 2 years long, and the machinery bill for that kind of earthwork was the kind of number Dale Calder folded up and put in his shirt pocket without comment. June listened to all of it from 3 rows away. Then she asked Karen Boyd one question. When a storm wrecks a hill, is it how much rain falls or how fast the water moves? Boyd looked at her a second before she answered. Speed, she said. Almost always the speed. June nodded, slow, like a door latching shut. That was March. By the first week of April, she was walking the hillside with a wooden triangle. Here is what June had found 3 days after Karen Boyd's visit in the bottom of Grandma Ruth's cedar chest. A government bulletin printed in 1935 called Terracing for Soil and Water Conservation, and all through its margins, in a 19-year-old's pencil, her great-great-grandfather had taken notes. On one page, under a diagram of a hillside, Harlan Voss had written 6 words and underlined them twice. Slow it, spread it, sink it. The men who wrote that bulletin were not guessing. They wrote it the same year a dust storm carried the soil of the Great Plains all the way to Washington and darkened the sky outside the Senate windows while a soil scientist named Hugh Hammond Bennett was testifying about erosion. Congress created the Soil Conservation Service within weeks, and the physics those men wrote down has not changed since. Moving water obeys a brutal law. Double its speed, and it can carry particles 64 times heavier. That's why a lazy sheet of rainwater lifts almost nothing, but the same water gathered into a channel and allowed to accelerate down a slope will cut through a Loess hillside like a saw. The rain was never the enemy. The speed was. And the cure was almost embarrassingly simple. A ditch dug dead level across the slope on the contour has no downhill to offer. Water reaching it stops. It spreads out along the whole length, sits, and sinks into the ground, right there on the hill, where the corn roots are, instead of racing to the bottom with the field on its back. Farmers call it a swale. It is a ditch designed to fail at being a ditch. And soil is worth that trouble for one reason above all. Nature needs up to 500 years to build a single inch of topsoil. One June thunderstorm can take it in an evening.
The wooden triangle came from page 4 of the bulletin, an A-frame level. 2 legs, a crossbar, a string, and a weight hung from the apex. Stand it on 2 stones, mark where the string crosses the bar, swap the legs onto each other's stones, and mark again. Halfway between the 2 marks is true level, forever. No batteries, no surveyor. Walk it across a hillside leg over leg, chalking each level step, and the hill will hand you its own contour lines. It cost her nothing. The CCC boys had built thousands of them. The first failure was her own impatience. She'd started digging before she finished reading and cut her first 200 feet by eye, trusting the look of the land. An April shower found every inch of her error. Water walked the length of that not-quite-level trench, gathered at the low end like schoolkids at a fire drill, and punched through the bank. In 1 hour, her ditch did to the hillside exactly what she had built it to prevent. It concentrated the water. A swale that's off level, she learned, is worse than no swale at all. She dug the whole stretch again, on the chalk marks this time. It was Mark, of all people, who showed up the next evening with the second spade. He never said why. She never asked. The second failure was the berm. She'd piled her dig dirt loose on the downhill lip, fresh and fluffy as garden soil, and a hard rain in mid-May topped the swale and cut through it in 3 places. Back to the bulletin, and there it was, underlined by a boy in 1935. The berm must be settled, packed, and grassed before it is trusted, and every swale needs a spillway, a chosen low spot floored with sod, where overflow can leave gently at a place you picked, instead of violently at a place the water picks. She walked her berms end to end to pack them, seeded them with oats and brome, and cut a sodded spillway into each one, each spillway feeding the swale below it. The top of the hill was the last problem. It needed one broad diversion cut too big for a girl with a spade. That one was solved by Arlen Peterson, 74, who had run the county road grader for 40 years and whose own father stood shovel in hand in one of the photographs in Harlan Voss's album. He brought his old tractor and a box blade one Saturday and cut it in an afternoon. He took his pay in 24 brown eggs in that photograph, and everyone came out ahead on the deal. By the second week of June, 5 level swales lay stacked across the west hillside, packed, grassed, and spillwayed, with the diversion standing guard on top. Then the sky opened, and the whole county found out what June had built. The storms came on the last Friday of June, the kind meteorologists call training storms, cell after cell running down the same track like boxcars, 4.5 inches by 10 o'clock, flash flood warnings in 3 counties, the kind of night farmers spent at the window not saying much. Saturday morning told the story. Up and down the blacktop, bean fields lay buried under fans of silt. Fresh gullies stood raw as open cuts. A quarter mile of road shoulder had washed into the ditch. Karen Boyd was out by 8 doing damage assessments, and when she came over the rise at the Calder place, she stopped her truck in the middle of the road. 5 ribbons of still water lay across the west hillside, brim full, stacked one above another like terraces of glass. The spillways trickled politely, each one handing its overflow down to the next swale in line. Between them, the young corn stood straight and unbothered, the ground dark and drinking. Not one new cut on the whole slope, and at the bottom the stock pond sat full to the grass, and clear. Boyd knew exactly what clear water meant. Every other pond she'd passed that morning was the color of chocolate milk, full of somebody's field. This hill had kept its soil. The neighbors came the way they always come, in 2s and 3s, slow trucks and folded arms. They stood at the fence a while. Then one of them, a big man who had laughed in Moorhead in April, walked down and knelt at the Loess swale and ran his hand through the clear, still water. He looked up at the 13-year-old standing there in mud to her knees. "Who laid these lines out for you?" "A boy from the camp at Pisgah," June said. "In 1935. He was 19. She walked them through all of it. The A-frame, the chalk marks, the speed of water, the ditch she dug twice, the spillways. The laughter was gone. In its place was the quieter thing that always replaces it in these stories, the thing that takes longer to arrive and stays longer once it does. Before they left, 3 of those men asked if she'd walk their hills with the wooden triangle before fall. She said she would. In 1937, with the dust storms still blowing, President Franklin Roosevelt wrote a letter to the governors of every state and put the whole matter in one sentence. "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." June Calder saved a hillside with a spade, a ball of twine, and 3 fence boards, but the tools were never the story. The story is a girl who thought to ask whether the enemy was the rain or the speed, the patience to read an 80-year-old bulletin all the way through, including page 4, the humility to dig the same 600 feet twice. The oldest knowledge on a farm is usually already paid for the hard way by people who watch the sky turn black, and it sits waiting in cedar chest and attic boxes for somebody curious enough to open the lid. June is 14 now. The swales came through 2 more storm seasons without a scratch, and there are chalk marks on 3 more hillsides in Monona County. The A-frame hangs on a nail in the barn, string still true. Ruth's cedar chest stays open on the sideboard these days, and in a small frame on Arlen Peterson's mantle there's a photograph of a row of boys with shovels squinting into the sun in 1935. One of them 19 years old, and about to save a farm he would never see. What's the oldest piece of farm wisdom that's ever proved itself to you? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. Tell us where you're watching from, too. This porch stretches a lot further than we ever expected. And if stories like June's are worth your evening, subscribe. There's a new one from the Heartland every week.